Happy Friday, Common Sense Army. On this episode of the Why I'm Right podcast, we're talking about Nebraska and Maine, and we're talking about specifically the Obamaha, Nebraska problem. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you're about to find out, because Nebraska and Maine do things a little bit differently in their election cycles. And I'm telling you right now, if this changes, this could impact not only the 2024 election, but every election for years to come. Make sure you stay tuned here, because I'm about to tell you why I'm right.
We live in a world filled with noise and confusion, clickbait, and outright lies in the media. But here, we cut through the clutter to find the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it may be. This is Why I'm Right, the podcast where we dig deeper, ask the tough questions, and unravel the tangled webs of political and current events. Join us as we dissect the latest news, analyze political rhetoric, and challenge the narratives that dominate the mainstream discourse. We're not shy. From dissecting the motives behind policy decisions to uncovering the hidden agendas of public figures, it's what we do. It's time to think for ourselves. This is Why I'm Right. And now your unafraid and unapologetic host, Matt Taylor.
Welcome to the Why I'm Right show, and today we're talking about 2024, an election cycle that is going on right now as we speak, and things are happening in two states in particular that we're going to dive into in detail right here, right now. I'm talking about Nebraska and Maine. If you don't know or you haven't heard about Obamaha, well, you're about to learn about it all. And before I get into the podcast, I just want to remind everyone out there, if you could do me a favor, click the link right here below, click subscribe, click like, whatever it is. Share these videos, share these podcasts with your friends, with your family, with people who agree with us, with people who don't agree with us, because like I say on every podcast, the only way we're going to grow the Common Sense Army every single day is if you guys share these videos, subscribe to the podcast, and we can grow this one day at a time, one podcast at a time. And without further ado, let's dive into Obamaha, Nebraska. Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about and you've never heard of Obamaha, it's a term that was coined back in 2012. And it specifically talks about the 2nd district, congressional district in the state of Nebraska, where two states in our nation, so 48 states have a pretty simple, a super simple winner-take-all electoral college vote tally method, meaning the presidential election's going on. If somebody in Florida, for example, let's use Florida as the example, that's where I'm at today. If Trump gets more votes than Biden in the state of Florida, and Trump has the most popular votes in the state, Trump gets the electoral college votes. All of the electoral college votes from the state of Florida go towards Donald Trump. Well, in two states in our nation, Maine and Nebraska, they do their elections a little bit differently. They split their electoral college votes differently. They use what they call the congressional district method, which allows them to allocate 2 electoral college votes to the state popular vote winner and 1 electoral college vote to the popular vote winner in each congressional district. So, for example, Nebraska has 2 congressional districts in the state. If Trump wins the state of Nebraska, he'll get 2 for the popular vote. He'll get 1 for the 1st district, and then Biden, or whoever the Democrat Party's nominee would be, would most likely get the 2nd electoral college vote for the 2nd district in the state of Nebraska. Now, 1 electoral college vote you may not think means much, but if you don't know, you need 270 to become the president of the United States. But under a scenario where Joe Biden wins the northern swing states, and also he polls the Democrat stronghold states or uncontested states in this nation, as long as he wins that Nebraska's 2nd district vote, he would become the president of the United States and get just 270 votes. So hear me out one more time there. If Biden wins the 3 northern swing states in this nation and pulls the other Democrat stronghold states, and he also gets that 1 electoral college vote from the 2nd district in Nebraska, he'll become the president of the United States with exactly 270 electoral college votes. A lot of people out there have been arguing back and forth for years since 2012 when this term was coined, Obamaha, because the plan was it was a super contested election, super close election, and many people in the Democrat Party, especially people within the Obama campaign, believed that one vote in Omaha, Nebraska, the second district in Nebraska, would become the reason Obama won the presidency. Well, things went a little bit differently. Obama got much more electoral college votes, and he didn't need the one, even though he got it in Nebraska. He didn't need that one to become president. But there is now a circumstance in this upcoming election, I just gave it to you, where if Biden actually wins the 3 northern swing states and pulls other Democrat stronghold states, uncontested Democrat states, and he does get that one electoral college vote from Nebraska, Omaha, Nebraska, Obamaha, Nebraska, he'll get exactly 270 electoral college votes. Well, many people have been up in arms, and specifically Charlie Kirk and Turning Point USA has been out there advocating for Maine and Nebraska to change their laws to come up to speed with the rest of the nation. Like I said, this is not a crazy ideology here. This is not a radical opinion, because at the end of the day, when 48 states are doing it a certain way and 2 aren't, at some point, which side is radical, the 48 states or the 2 doing it differently? And so originally when I heard that Charlie Kirk and Turning Point USA and other Republicans out there and the Nebraska governor is now on board with this new law changing to make it so every electoral college vote from the state of Nebraska goes to the popular vote winner in the state of Nebraska. When I heard that they're trying to change this at the last minute here in an election year, close to an election, I originally thought it sounded crazy. It sounded wrong. It sounded like something maybe we shouldn't do, especially this close to the election. But then I sat back and thought about it a little bit more. And I started to think about it. If every state did it this way, the election this way, the same way that Maine and Nebraska do it, think about California, for example. Right? If you're a Democrat, you need California. A Democrat most likely will win California. It's one of those Democrat uncontested states that I mentioned earlier, and it has a ton of electoral college implications. But if you think about it, if every state did it the way that Maine and Nebraska did, and California, for example, for the little sliver of Republican districts in California, if they gave those electoral college votes to Donald Trump, well, all of a sudden, the election would be over before it even started. So think about that. If California, for example, didn't give every electoral college vote to the presidential candidate that got the most votes in the state and split it up by district, all of a sudden the election would be over because more electoral college districts or congressional districts in this country would go Republican instantaneously. So a radical idea would be to say every state should do it the way that Maine and Nebraska are doing. Instead, Republicans and Charlie Kirk and Turning Point USA are out there right now advocating for Maine and Nebraska to get on board with the rest of the nation. And what I thought about a little bit further, and when you think about it in detail, a state like Nebraska is 2-1 Republican. I'll say it again. A state like Nebraska is 2-1 Republican. There are 600,000 registered Republicans in the state of Nebraska and only 300,000 registered Democrats in the state of Nebraska. And somehow with their laws, the way their elections are run, for our United States government, for our United States president, they do things differently, and that could impact who becomes the president of the United States. So even though it's a Republican stronghold state, a state that overwhelmingly votes Republican 2-1, I just said it's 600,000 to 300,000, overwhelmingly is a Republican state, could hurt Donald Trump or whoever the Republican nominee is in this election or elections of the future. And when you think about it that way, it starts to get you to wonder why they're doing it this way in general. And so, again, when you look at this election cycle, we're getting closer and closer. We're 200 whatever days out from election day. And Democrats are out there right now saying they want RFK to not be on ballots in certain states because it's going to hurt Joe Biden. For example, in the state of Nebraska, if RFK is on the ballot in the state of Nebraska, guess what? Most likely, again, this is my opinion here, most likely what will happen in the 2nd congressional district is RFK will pull some of the Democrat votes from Joe Biden, and Trump will get the popular vote in that state. Therefore, this whole Obamaha problem would be null and void. But if RFK isn't on the ballot in Nebraska, what's going to happen is this. Trump will get the popular vote easily in the state of Nebraska. Trump will get the congressional district for the 1st district in Nebraska, and Biden will pull one electoral college vote in the 2nd district, which is overwhelmingly Democrat. And so when you really, really think about this, if this goes on and RFK is on the ballot, let's bring him back into the picture for a second. If RFK is on the ballot and the scenario I mentioned earlier, Biden wins the 3 northern swing states and pull all other Democrat stronghold states, uncontested Democrat states, and guess what happens here? If Trump gets that 2nd district in the state of Nebraska, all of a sudden, instead of it being 270 Joe Biden, it is now 269. And in that scenario, the vote goes to the House of Representatives. So how worried are Democrats about RFK Jr.? I asked this because I brought it up on previous podcasts. If you really break down the RFK Jr. scenario, Democrats for a long time in the beginning of this election cycle, I'm talking about 6, 7, 8 months ago, were saying we're not worried about RFK because RFK is going to pull from Trump because RFK is a conspiracy theory. He's an anti-vaxxer. He's somebody that's out there. He's going to pull from Trump. Now, all of a sudden, Democrats and Joe Biden and the Biden administration are worried about RFK because of Omaha, Nebraska, and because of the fact that they're seeing what's going on. RFK is improving in the polls day in and day out, and independents overwhelmingly support RFK Jr. And so when you really break down the Obamaha, Nebraska argument, and you think about why Republicans are now out there advocating for this change is because they want to see, obviously, Donald Trump in office, but they also want an election where every state is doing things the same way. Again, this is not a state thing, in my opinion. When you're talking about the President of the United States, this is not a state issue. This is really a federal issue. Every state has their own voter laws. I get it. But at the end of the day, it comes down to this for me. How worried are Democrats about RFK and this Obamaha stronghold changing? And so when you see the Biden administration trying to block RFK Jr. from getting on the ballot in certain states, and you see them adamantly pushing against this move from the Nebraska governor to overturn the way the elections have been done for years and trying to get the election to now be done the same way that almost every state in this country, like I said, 48 of 50 states are doing, you have to ask why. And so, again, it goes back to this map that I just talked about, the road to 270, the path to 270, the path to the presidency of the United States of America. And Jim Messina, who was Barack Obama's presidential campaign manager in 2012, when they coined the term Obamaha because they were worried that the election was going to be so close, they need this one electoral college vote in the 2nd district of Nebraska to win the election. Again, it didn't become a problem then, but just because it didn't become a problem then doesn't mean it's not going to become a problem now. And so Jim Messina recently was on MSNBC and was interviewed. I'm going to play the clip here, but he recently was on MSNBC talking about the Obamaha problem and calling Republicans anti-democracy and calling Republicans election overturners for trying to push for this, what seems common sense approach to elections. Like I said, it's not a radical ideology here. Whoever gets the most votes in 48 of the 50 states gets all the electoral college votes for those states. The only 2 states that don't do that are Maine and Nebraska. So is it radical to try to get one state or both states to hop on board with the rest of the nation? I don't know. But listen here to Jim Messina, like I said, on MSNBC, talking about this issue specifically, and then I'm going to dive into it a little bit further. Here is Jim Messina.
November.
So, Jim, it is never too early to talk about 270, the magic number. No. And there's some development.
Let's talk about the map.
Yeah, let's talk about the map for a second, because there's a buzzing about Nebraska right now. The governor there has thrown his support behind an effort that would no longer allocate the electoral votes by congressional district. Because right now, it's 5 votes there. Typically, Republicans get 4, and President Biden, Democrats get the 1 from Omaha.
That's right.
If that changes, and we don't know that it will, the state legislature is going to look at it, but if that changes, that takes away Biden's best path to win. Because if he wins Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, but loses the other swing states and no longer picks up the 1 in Nebraska, 269, that leads playbook this morning, the alarm among Democrats that this is possible. What do you think?
I think this is what the modern Republican Party has become. They're now changing the rules in the middle, trying to benefit themselves. This is the hell that Donald Trump hath wrought. In the middle of this, changing the rules 200 days before the election is ridiculous. I think you're right. I think there are real simulation problems. When you look at the map, that 1 electoral vote really matters in the combination of other things. Then you need another state. Yeah. And so the easiest pathway to victory has always been the Midwestern 3 states combined with Nebraska. Something tells me they're not going to get away with it this easy, and there will be a national outcry if they're trying to change the rules here. But it looks like they're going to look at it.
So you hear him there. There's going to be a national outcry against what the Republicans are doing, and it seems like Republicans have a ton of Republican support for this movement. And recently the governor of Nebraska said, put it on my desk and I will sign it. Let's make this of reality. And so when you hear Jim Messina say there's going to be a national outcry against this move because the Republicans are trying to change the rules of the election, oh, wait, you mean like going after your political opponents and weaponizing the Department of Justice against your top political opponent? Wouldn't that result in a national outcry? Or wait, wouldn't it be like you trying to, in states like Colorado and other states across the country, trying to remove the GOP nominee from the ballot in those states? Wouldn't that be something that would cause a national outcry? Or trying to block RFK Jr. from the ballot and not giving him Secret Service protection. I already did a whole podcast on the fact that Biden won't give somebody whose dad and uncle were assassinated. Both were the president and in Congress. And I mean, when you look at this, and, you know, would it cause a national outcry if we don't have voter ID laws or we don't have signature verification? So when you really think about this, again, when I first heard this Nebraska-Omaha issue, the 2nd Congressional District in Nebraska, it doesn't even make sense to do the election this way because, like I said earlier, if every state did it this way, the way that Maine and Nebraska are doing it, the election would be done prior to Election Day. We would know who the president's going to be. It's going to be Donald J. Trump. So in anything, the Republicans should be pushing for every state to do it this way. But they're not. And so, yes, Republicans need to start looking at things like this because I believe the system is set up by the elites in this country, the elites over time, to rig elections one way. And so when you hear Jim Messina, who's a Democrat insider, somebody who was the campaign manager for Barack Obama in 2012, pretty much an architect for the victory roadmap for any Democrat, and he says this would take away the easiest path to win for Joe Biden, because the easiest path is to win the 3 swing states in the North, win the Democrat stronghold states, win the blue wall, and then get the 1 electoral college vote in Nebraska. And so this has been the roadmap, the path here. But the law doesn't make sense. The election doesn't make sense. And so when things don't make sense, you have to start asking why. And so when you think about the fact that why are they trying to block RFK Jr. from the ballot in certain states, it's because their concern is RFK is going to pull from Joe. And Trump's going to win popular votes in other states and get those states. But then in a scenario like Omaha, Nebraska, or in Maine, where they do the exact same thing, if RFK pulls any votes from Biden in Maine and Nebraska in the districts that typically go towards a Democrat president, all of a sudden, boop, their easy roadmap to victory becomes much, much, much more challenging. And so again, like I said to start this podcast, when you break down this Omaha, Nebraska and this Maine issue, Republicans are out there today pushing for this to be overturned. Democrats are adamantly against it. You have to ask yourself, which is more common sense, to have the two states that don't do the elections the same way as the other 48 states, or keep it the same for no apparent reason other than that's the way it's been done for a certain amount of time since the 1990s when this was put into place. And again, Republicans are saying, we hope we don't need this. We hope we don't need that one vote in Nebraska. We hope we don't need that one vote in Maine. But in an election where you have a third-party candidate who's polling 20%, 30% in some polls, all of a sudden you may need that one electoral college vote. Or else we're going to end up in a 269-269 tie. And no one may get to 270, which means it goes to the House of Representatives. And so I wanted to break down this issue because it's going on in the world today. And again, Democrats are now saying this is Republicans doing something that's so anti-democracy and so anti the way we do our elections. But at the same time, the same people that are saying that in the public eye are the same people who support the Democrats weaponizing the Department of Justice against Donald Trump. They're the same people that support removing Trump from certain states, removing RFK from certain states, not giving RFK Secret Service protection, and not having any voter ID laws or signature verifications in swing states and other states across the country. Who's anti-democracy? And at some point, this has to become about the people in this country and the will of the people. And so the people elected a Republican governor in Nebraska because, like I said, it's 2-1 in the state of Nebraska, 600 to 300,000. More Republicans are in the state of Nebraska. They elected a Republican governor, and a Republican governor is looking to do something that's going to benefit the Republican Party. Sounds like the will of the people in Nebraska is to overturn this and to change the way we're doing our elections in Nebraska. And Maine's not far behind. So we're going to stay tuned and look at this issue as we move forward on this podcast. And like I said, this episode really just was to start talking about the math here. Because the Electoral College map is going to be something you're going to see every single day as we get to September, October, November. And again, if Republicans can change the way Nebraska's done, it's going to make the path to victory for Joe Biden that much harder. And so how likely is a 269 tie? I don't know. How likely is it Joe Biden gets exactly 270 votes by getting the one in Nebraska? I don't know. But like I said, we need to have secure elections in this country, and that's why I support voter ID laws. That's why I support candidates being put on the ballots, especially candidates that are polling 20, 30, 40% in certain states, even higher in other states. Those people need to be on the ballot in all the states so that the will of the people can decide who is the president of the United States and not decided by some establishment figures. And I support not going after our political opponents by weaponizing the Department of Justice. And I support not denying Secret Service protection for political opponents. So as we head into the election season, which is right around the corner, we're already in it, but it's about to get real hot. You know, normally in sports, as you get closer and closer to the playoffs, things get that much more important. And we're heading into the playoff season. And things are starting to get hot. And so I'll keep an eye on the Obamaha issue in Nebraska and Maine and seeing what their laws are going to be and seeing if this is going to get overturned or seeing what. But you need to, give me your opinion on this. Should Republicans do this? Is this just a response to the atrocities we've seen from the Biden administration that are pushing for anti-election integrity laws? Is this a response from the Republicans saying we've had enough of you going after Trump in the courts? What is this? And I'll tell you something. It seems like this is going to happen in Nebraska. Now, there's going to be pushback. There's going to be lawsuits. There's going to be things that go on. But it seems like Nebraska is pretty likely that the governor is going to change the way the elections are done. That's why the law has to be written very perfectly. The way the law has to be written has to be perfectly, because it is going to be challenged over and over. And they're going to get money from out of the states to come in. You know how the Democrats roll. We've seen the way that they get money from out of the state to, support New York City going after Trump, Georgia going after Trump. We see the out-of-state money coming in. And so, like I said, as we get into the playoff season, the election season, these things are getting very, very interesting. And if this law passes, this improves the chance that Donald J. Trump will be the next president of the United States. So, again, we got a lot of episodes coming out. Today's Friday. Over the weekend, I'm going to release an episode talking about DEI. I've talked about it on a few other podcasts in the past, but I'm going to dive into some of the main issues with DEI. That's diversity, equity, and inclusion, and some of the things that are going on across the country. I have some personal experiences, some of my family experiences with DEI. I'm going to talk about those on this podcast and talk about how our society is changing in whole. So stay tuned over the weekend for that episode, and then next week we'll be back, as always, giving you the news and talking about the why behind every one of the headlines. Again, we have to look beyond the headlines in this country because there is so much going on that they don't want you to know about, and my job here at the Why I'm Right podcast is to give you those whys. And so, as always, like I said, make sure you click the subscribe button, send this video to your friend, like this podcast, and let's keep growing the Common Sense Army one day at a time, one podcast at a time. I'll be back tomorrow. This has been the Why I'm Right podcast, and I just told you why I'm right.
You've been listening to Why I'm Right. Thanks for being a part of the Common Sense Army. Our passion is to cut through the noise and confusion and to bring light to clickbait and outright lies in the media. Unafraid, unapologetic, real and raw. We hope you've enjoyed the show. If you did, make sure to like, rate, and review. We'll be back soon. But in the meantime, find us on Instagram at Why I'm Right, on X at Why I'm Right Pod. And for more, hit the website at www.whyimrightpodcast.com. See you next time.